Live.
Hello,
Hello, welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers.
I'm Olivia Candosia.
I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy. Olivia is an intern therapist, but this is not therapy. This is just an open conversation. Just Olivia and I are here talking with one another and with all of you. Um, until and unless you put anything in the chat, we're just going to do our best to imagine who you might be, what you might be hearing from us, what you might be interested in, and taking that into consideration as we talk. But if and when you write in the chat, if you're willing and able, we love that because that gives us more information about who you are and what you're interested in and what you're hearing and what you'd like to explore. So please join us there. We read out the comments in the chat because we're streaming on 3 different platforms at once, and viewers will only see the comments that are from the platform they're on. If you're on Facebook, you'll only see the Facebook comments. So if we read them out so that if there's a comment from Twitch, the people on YouTube and Facebook know what it says also. We work with a private therapy practice called Effective Artistry. Our office is in Northbrook, Illinois. We do individual, couples, family, and group therapy with people in the state of Illinois. We also work with a couple of executive functioning coaches who can work with people all over the world via the internet. We're going to talk about whatever we're going to talk about because that's how it works. And just like any conversation, if you're having a conversation with someone, if you're paying attention to someone, what they're saying, what they're doing, it impacts what you think and what you do next. Same here. You're listening to us, we're paying attention to you. If you say something in the chat, that impacts where we go. And please don't think that you need to stay on topic of whatever we're discussing. You definitely don't. You can put out whatever you want at any point. If you're popping in later on in the stream, then you're not hearing this right now, obviously, but that's part of the reason it is this way, so that people don't feel like they need to have watched the stream from the beginning, otherwise they can't say anything. We'll go wherever. We're going to range all over the place anyway, whether anybody says anything or not, so don't worry about staying on topic. Anything else?
No.
I think that's it.
I was just thinking about interrupting though.
Yeah.
And how much easier it is to do via typing. Like I found in my classes, like there've been for me at least, like little jokes or asides I want to make or things that I don't feel like everyone needs to hear, but I can, or like out loud, but I can put it in the chat and not be, obstructing class. And I don't know, I find myself being the person that does it often.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I were just talking about asynchronous written communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's helpful for people, at least the way I think about it, there's like a matrix here of communication where synchronous versus asynchronous is one aspect of it, meaning are we like conversing or communicating live?
Mm-hmm.
And then the medium of the communication is the other aspect. Are we having a face-to-face conversation? Are we writing messages to one another? Are we talking on the phone so we can hear each other but not see each other? Is it one of those things where we can see each other but not hear each other, and all those variables, like, there's a little kind of charter table, right, of asynchronous versions and synchronous versions of all of those things, and they just lend themselves to different stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting you say interrupt, because in this case, what you mean is, if I'm getting it right, you just mean writing and sending a message while someone else is communicating.
Yes.
Where a lot of the time when people are saying interrupt, they mean communicating something in such a way that requires that the person who is currently communicating has to stop communicating.
I mean, that's why I love it, because I'm like, I'm not going to bother you.
Yeah, you're not stopping anybody from saying what they're saying. When I'm playing D&D online and don't want to interrupt, I have a thought that needs to be said, I type it in the chat. Unfortunately, one player still gets distracted if I post anything. Like, she'll stop what she's saying and not move on until she's read and understood my message, which means I can't use it. It's interesting because that's like right on line with what you and I were just discussing before we started.
The limited D&D I have played has been online, and I was kind of like that person they're mentioning of just like, hang on, I have to process the secret message you told me that no one else can know. It was very hard.
Process is one of those words that comes up in this kind of stuff a lot. Okay. There are upsides and downsides to any different way of communicating, right? Advantages, disadvantages, we could say. a Bast Insider says, oh, I posted in the public chat, not like a private message.
Oh, gotcha.
And so sometimes we like purposefully select a particular type of communication because for the purposes of whatever we're trying to do there, the advantages of that type of communication are important and the disadvantages aren't. Other times it's just about like what we have available to us, but in that case, it's still helpful to lean into the advantages and away from the disadvantages, right? So asynchronous written communication, which is a really interesting one because until like literally within the last couple decades, it was probably the most rare form of communication in the history of our species. I mean, writing in and of itself was not around, to the best of our knowledge, until like 6,000 years ago. I don't know. I could be off on that date, but from what I understand, writing is not that old. For a species that's 200,000 years old. Like I'm posting it in the chat specifically because it does not need to be addressed right now. And I've been clear about that, but they've said they have to stop and read it if they see it. Yeah, that's part of what we were talking about, right? That like 100%. One of the advantages of asynchronous written communication these days, again, very new, so we're all still figuring it out. As opposed to like, spoken language, which is hundreds of thousands of years old, if not significantly older. Written communication is not that old. And until very, very recently, asynchronous written communication was primarily one directional. Someone would write a book or write something on a wall or whatever, and someone else would read it later on and not like respond to the original, the person who wrote it. Then at a certain point, yes, correspondence starts happening. But in order for correspondence to happen in any meaningful way, there has to be like people who live separate from one another and yet are aware of one another, and some sort of infrastructure that allows for them to be able to send pieces of paper back and forth to one another. So with written correspondence back and forth between people, we're talking about a few hundred years old, really. And then, of course, now we have text, we have all kinds of chat messaging, communicating online, etc., emails, whatever. So I don't think it's still, you could say that it's the most common way of people communicating with one another, although certainly for some people it's the most common way of communicating, that they write and text and message and email more than they speak to people. But much more common than it ever was before. And traditionalists like to look down on it and complain about things like emojis and GIFs and memes and whatever, but that's all stuff that's, if we had had the technological capacity to do rapid synchronous written communication, right? Like we are both actively in this, everything I'm writing, you're seeing it as I'm writing it, everything you write in response immediately. Like synchronous written communication is literally brand new. I mean, that did not exist until, I guess you could say, the first days of the old Usenet days, or maybe even like the DARPANET, I don't know. But still, like all this we're talking about is like early 80s, late 70s. So that's really new. But yeah, we're just figuring it out. If we'd been able to communicate via written images or whatever synchronously like that, then we would have invented memes and emojis and stuff a long time ago. Like,
you were talking about the urgency, like what's urgent for one person doesn't have, that is something I'm very curious about, because that's kind of what is happening here a little bit.
So there's one of the advantages of asynchronous written communication is that I can write whatever I want to write and send it whenever I want to send it, even if it's an inconvenient time for you. Right, like that's part of the point of being able to send you a text instead of give you a phone call is, in order, if I'm trying to communicate to you on the phone, you have to be in a place where you can stop doing whatever else you're doing and answer the call and focus on that. If I send you a text, you don't have to stop doing what you're doing. You'll see it when you see it, right? Which is great. Now, of course, naturally there are times where, for various reasons, I'm sending a text or a message or an email, but it is urgent and I do want you to see it right away. And we can't really know that as the receiver, right? This is why like turning off read receipts or being left on read or whatever is such a big deal, is because I'm trying to guess, if you send me a message, is this one of those times where like if I don't respond quickly, you're going to be real upset or it's going to cause some kind of problem? Or if I don't respond quickly, it's not a big deal, it doesn't really matter. And I have limited information to be able to guess that on.
My stomach growled so loud.
I did not hear that.
It's like 5 seconds long.
So it's pretty rare that responding to asynchronous written communication too quickly is going to cause a problem or upset someone. It's much more likely if someone is upset about how you're responding that it would be because of how long you took too
It just
long.
makes me think of people when they start dating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people have this, better safe than sorry. Err on the side of safety. If I respond really quickly, then I'm in the clear. But if I wait too long,
I don't know. I thought it was the other way. Like if I respond too quickly, that's like too eager.
in the very specific circumstance of early on in dating in our culture, there is a lot talked about there where like if you respond too quickly, it shows too much eagerness and whatever. I have a lot of thoughts about how garbage all that advice is. But the whole reason, like when we have to talk about something to that extent, what it indicates is that whatever we're advising people to not do or to do differently is a thing that is inherently valuable or beneficial, or people wouldn't be doing it all the time that we need to warn them away from. Same with teaching people not to interrupt. Interrupting is rude, don't interrupt. Why is everyone interrupting in the first place that we need to be taught that? Because there's inherent benefit to doing it that way.
Yeah.
Or we wouldn't do it that way. There's upsides and there are downsides, right? It's just a general piece of advice from me to whomever. And of course, this is on the other side of having been married for 11 years now and whatnot. So I'm in a different situation than other people are, whatever. The general piece of advice: anybody who becomes less interested in you because you are eager in them, meaning you're interested in them and clearly communicating to them that you're interested in them, is probably not somebody that would be a good person for you to get into a relationship with anyway. Like, I don't know. If let's imagine that someone would get turned off by you being too eager, but if you're careful about following rules about how long you wait before you respond and whatever, you can keep them around. At what point do you stop having to be careful? At any point, do you get to just communicate with them in a way that feels natural, or for the rest of your life now, you just have to be like, okay, well, I want to message them, but I shouldn't because that would be too much. Or at some point you just stop and just communicate how you naturally would. And at that point, either they're going to have a problem with it or they won't. And if they don't have a problem with it at that point, they probably wouldn't have had a problem with it earlier. Would you like to grab some food?
I don't know. It's okay. I should have eaten is what's happening. I'm like, oh my God. It's okay.
I should have eaten, but I don't want to grab food.
I don't want to like go downstairs and have to, I didn't bring anything is the thing.
Oh.
Yeah, it's okay.
There's snacks in the break room and stuff, protein bars and whatnot if you like. I'm not going to push you. I'm just saying that's an option.
Okay, a good thing to be aware of. Okay, great.
Anyway, yes, it makes sense that people will often treat asynchronous communication as though like, I need to read this. I need to treat it as though it is urgent, because sometimes it is, or sometimes people will be upset about like, why did you not respond to my text, right? So that makes sense. But it's important to kind of communicate about this stuff with people. We actually have all kinds of code phrases in our language. Like a lot of what people talk about is like corporate speak or like email jargon or whatever, is coded ways of indicating to people like, this is the kind of email that you don't need to respond to. This is the kind of email where if you don't respond quickly, it will cause a problem or I will be upset. This is the kind of email where you could take your time. I need a response, but you can take your time. We have all these little subtle ways of indicating this to others.
Sometimes the code is not going to change anything for me.
Very true.
That like happens. With this of like, if my DM sent me a message too, I think I'd be like, I see something flashing on my screen. It's taking up my attention now. Like I see this new piece of information. I want the information.
Which is, again, understandable.
Yeah.
And the issue there, the way in which you might be different from other people who are able to just go on whatever,
Yeah.
is not that you're paying attention to the thing.
Mhm.
Although certainly it is possible that some people just don't even notice it or whatever,
Sure.
right? But it's also possible that other people notice it and just think, okay, like whatever, I'll get to it when I get to it.
Mhm.
And you're treating it as, no, I got to get to it now.
Yeah.
So you're treating it with a sense of urgency.
Yep.
Now, why you're treating it with that sense of urgency, who knows? We can explore particular theories about it. But when the other person explicitly is communicating to you that these things I'm sending you are not urgent, and even more specifically, as Bast Insider said here, and as I will say to people when I do like bug in the ear supervision, whatever, when I say, if you treat all of my messages as though they are urgent, that limits my ability to send messages because now I have to think about, is this worth interrupting them
Right.
for? Whereas what I want it to be is just, if I feel like sending something, I send it. But in order
Yeah.
for that to work, you have to be able to not treat, you have to hear
That was
what I'm
really
saying.
challenging for me. And I know other therapists here have said the same thing of like, oh my God, I didn't realize that like I didn't have to pay attention to everything Brandon said.
Even though I say it before we do it.
I know you do.
And this is not a criticism. Every single time I say it before we do it.
Yep.
And every single time the person that I'm doing the training with, the bug in the ear supervision with, says like, yeah, I get it. That'll be fine. And then nobody ever does it. Same with, if you're going to respond to me, respond out loud. Don't just write secretly. And also, if you are reading what I'm writing and it interferes with your ability to hear what the other person is saying, then just announce to them like, hold on a second, I'm going to read this thing.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff. I do it that way on purpose because that's the best way to do it. I don't expect anyone to do it the first time.
Yeah.
We train into it. It helps me to chat because it gets what I have to say out of my head, so I don't have to worry about forgetting it, and I can focus on what's being said. And I understand it's not her fault, but I'm a little annoyed that I can't do the thing that helps me.
Yeah.
Well, so that's likely what she would say if we were to say that, like, hey, if you would ignore it, that would allow Bast Insider to do the thing that helps them. Then she could say, like, yeah, I get that, and that's helpful to Bast Insider and whatever, but I can't get it out of my head until I read it, so that's a little annoying that I can't do what's most helpful for me.
Mhm.
And again, this is the kind of thing that happens as we're trying to figure out the rules. We're trying to figure out the way to make it so that everybody gets exactly what they want all the time, or nobody ever has to like deal with something that's annoying or make a sacrifice or whatever, right? But sometimes there are just mutually exclusive things. Sometimes I would rather write a thing and you would rather read it when I send it, and I would rather that you don't, but you would rather that you do, But yes, it is helpful to communicate with one another in advance about like, hey, I want to be able to send you things without having to think like, if I send it to you, it's disrupting you. So please don't treat my messages as though they're important. It's also important for the other person to say like, hey, just so that you know, I have a tendency to treat all messages as though they're urgent and important, and I'll try to hear what you're saying and understand that, but you got to know that I'm coming from my place too, and whatever. The more you communicate, this is called, I was going to say this is called meta-communication, but it's not. Because meta-communication is a phrase used for different things. This should be called meta-communication. In order to communicate more efficiently and effectively with someone, you communicate about the communication.
Mm-hmm. That's not a meta-communication? Oh, well, I guess that's like in order to.
Because meta-communication is a phrase that's used to refer to like the non-explicit communication, the body language, and the contextual.
All of it.
Yeah, it's just all that we call meta-communication. I don't know why. That's what we call it. But yeah, setting the parameters of the communication, clarifying. This is kind of like anytime you miscommunicate with someone, I have a whole process of, the optimal way to go about benefiting from that miscommunication, clarifying it, repairing it.
You're so. The other day when I called you on the phone, you were so helpful. Like, okay, I think you're hearing me say these things, but I'm not. And you really helped me slow down. It took a while, but it worked. And it's just like, I don't know. It's a great skill set to have, Brandon.
Well, it's helpful in the ways that it's helpful, and I have constructed my life around those things because that's what I do a lot. Is that a jackhammer in the background? Yes, that is a jackhammer. Unfortunately, they're doing construction outside of our offices, just on the other side of the windows there.
Is it annoying? Or not annoying, but is it? Can you still hear us? I'm guessing it's.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it.
Right. Fair.
certainly understandable if it interferes with people's ability to hear us.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, let us know, because we can like wrap up the stream earlier than we would otherwise if people are having a hard time following along. But there's, as far as I'm aware, nothing we can do to like change
Right.
the audio of it. Anyway, yeah. So you've got to communicate about communication. That if somebody's texting you all the time and it's annoying to you for whatever reason, then you got to communicate to that person and say like, hey, texting me that frequently is annoying to me. Or you could phrase it in different ways, right? But like, you know, this is my experience. This is what I would prefer. This is what I interpret. Being able to understand the difference between what one person is attempting to communicate and what the other person is interpreting from that communication, without it being that one person's right or one person's wrong, is hugely important in this. But yeah, a lot of the time when people are using asynchronous written communication, like email, chat, whatever, where there is not an expectation that the other person's on the other end responding right away, a lot of the time that is a deliberately selected method of communication, because just by selecting this method of communication, I'm telling you this is not an urgent thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not always the case, right? Sometimes I have your email address and no other way to contact you, so even though it's urgent, I got to email you and try to get your attention that way. But you should try to default to that, right? That if you're trying to get something from someone urgently, you use a method of contact that is more likely to be noticed by them immediately. And you put something, if you have to send an email, you put in the subject line urgent or whatever. Because the default assumption for most people is that asynchronous written communication is not urgent. You can get to it when you can get to it. If you struggle with that, that's something for you to work on. Something to communicate to other people, right? To say, hey, just so you know, when you send me messages, I feel a sense of urgency to have to respond to them. So sending me a lot of messages can be very overwhelming.
It's when it's live and I see it happening, which is why often I don't respond to text messages, because I know like, oh man, this is a commitment for me. Because if they just sent it, then it's a conversation. I don't know if I'm ready to get into a conversation right now. Like, it's very challenging for me to leave.
Is that just because of read receipts? Is it
No.
because you know that they know that you saw it?
Well,
If they didn't know that you saw it or when you saw it, would you feel differently?
yes.
So that's because of read receipts.
Yes.
So what you're talking about is also
I leave
Really?
notifications up.
really, really common, is that, oh, once that they see that I have read their message, now there's a ticking clock. And the longer I take to respond to it, the more upset they're going to be.
Well, not even upset. It's more of the, if I say a word and then they respond with a word, then I have to, in my mind, it means I have to continue.
But that would make you not want to respond right away, right? That would incentivize you to wait to respond so that you don't start a conversation. What is it that's incentivizing you to respond right away?
When I have time to invest myself in it.
No, I mean, you have some desire here.
Uh-huh.
We're talking about it as a sense of urgency, that they've sent a message,
Mhm.
you've seen it, they get a read receipt so that they know that you know that they know that you've seen it.
Mhm.
Now you feel some sense of urgency to have to respond. Part of the reason you don't want to respond is because if you do, it starts a live
Right.
conversation
And the urgency is just paired with guilt.
about,
Guilt with not responding and not prioritizing them.
right. So this, I think, relates a lot to that's inside of it. It says, I can still hear you. It's fine. It's not super loud, just consistent. Yeah, sorry about that. Hopefully it doesn't last much longer. Hopefully it's done by next week, but I don't know. This plays into our ideas about capacity, and like when people start talking about spoons and whatever, is we will often talk about whether someone does something that we would want them to do as being indicative of whether or not they care about us.
Yeah.
If I want you to do something and you do it, it means you care about me. If I want you to do something and you don't do it, it means you don't care about me, which is obviously not always the case, right? Like, there are plenty of times where you did something I wanted you to do, but I don't think of it as like you cared about me. It's just, obviously you should have done that thing I asked you to do. It has nothing to do with me. And there are other times where you don't do what I wanted you to do, but it's not that you don't care about me. It's just you were busy or whatever, right? So this like unwritten rule thing for a lot of people, I'd say probably most people in our culture about asynchronous communication is you don't need to respond to it right now, just respond to it when you can. Meaning, I know you might be busy or unable to look at messages right now. When you are able to look at messages, respond to me then.
Can means so many things to me though.
Well, and importantly, people are conflating two different things. One is seeing or reading a message. The other is responding to it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, logically, we could come up with a million reasons. It's not difficult to indicate, like, there are going to be times where I can read the message, but I can't respond to it. Or I have the time, the capacity, desire to read the message, but not the time or the energy or the desire or whatever else to respond to it. But that's where the you don't care fear comes in. Because if I see that you read it, well, now I know you have time. And especially depending on what I said to you, if anything in my message indicates that, like, there's something important to me here, or that I really care about your response or potential response. Now that I see that you've read it, now I'm assuming that you understand how important it is to me that you respond. And so now not responding indicates to me that you don't care. That does happen sometimes, but not nearly as much as the person on the other end worries about it happening.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like we worry, oh no, they'll see that I read it, but didn't respond. And therefore they're going to think all that stuff I just said.
It's strange to me too, because no one's ever, or at least verbalized that they've been mad at me for taking a long time to respond. But I just have,
Really?
I mean, maybe in the past, at some point, but like.
I mean, it happened. It's not, maybe my experience is unusual, but it's not an uncommon thing for someone to be like, hey, why didn't you respond to my message? Or whatever. Because sometimes I'm sending a message where I'm like, hey, do you want to get together? And it's timely. Or I'm at the store, do you need anything? Or, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like exceedingly rare for someone. It's pretty rare for someone to be like, I'm really mad at you for not responding. Even that's not super rare. Just, so I'm surprised it doesn't happen.
Not really. I mean, nothing, I guess, is urgent. As urgent as I am imagining it to be. The messages just feel very I don't know what I'm saying.
Wait, are you talking about just like G-chat messages for work? Or are you talking about all
I'm talking about text.
Well?
I'm talking about Instagram messages. I'm talking about.
No one's ever been upset with you leaving them on red?
Not really.
Interesting.
And then again, I think maybe I'm just theorizing here, but maybe it's because in grad school, everyone knows that I'm busy right now. And so they're like, well, no rush. They always say no rush.
Yeah, well, I mean, typically, it's not the most common for people to, for the most part, if I'm texting you, yeah, it's not something that I need an urgent response to. I'm just surprised that it never happened, because every once in a while, someone does text because they're expecting some kind of urgent answer.
Oh, you know what? My boss a couple weeks ago.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, there we go.
It does happen.
The next day, she's like, you never wrote back to me. You didn't even give me a thumbs up. You are such a millennial. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it needed a response.
I generally don't get upset with people taking a long time to respond. I do get upset with people not responding at all. I understand that. That makes sense. But that's an arbitrary distinction, right? Like how long of not responding before now it turns into they didn't respond at all. Because after a week, they didn't respond at all, but what if they responded the next week later, or after a couple months, and what if it's a year later? Which isn't to say that you're wrong or disagree with you about your own experience. I'm just saying we're all playing this guessing game all the time, where I'm trying to do my best to determine how likely it is to cause a problem if I don't respond to you quickly. And I'm taking into account all kinds of variables. Some of that is about you and our prior experiences together. Some of that is just a general sense, or with the specific content and subject matter of these messages.
This is just making me think that I want to convey in a message, I would like you to respond, so people know that this is something I want them to respond about.
Well, we do that, but we have little polite code phrases for that.
Can you give me some of those codes?
Hey, when you have a second, can you let me know? Blah, 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 blah. ASAP is a code for that.
I get upset if it was being ignored for multiple days.
Yeah. And that makes sense again. And of course, there are exceptions to that even for you, right? There are some messages that people could not respond for several days and it won't bother you. And there are some messages that it would bother you if it hasn't been responded to in an hour. For example, hey, no rush or anything, but can you just please let me know that you're okay? Because I haven't heard from you. I'm not upset about like that you haven't responded to me or anything. I'm just getting a little worried about you because it's unusual. Can you just let me know that you're okay? And then if they don't respond to that for an hour or whatever, you might get upset. So it's not that these are like not true like generalizations, rules. They are. It's just this stuff can't be navigated via rules. Rules are for default. Unless you have specific information otherwise, assume that it is this. Default to assuming that it's this, right? But yeah, with all kinds of ways of, hey, this is kind of urgent. Can you let me know, blah, blah, blah. Or a very common way is not a specific phrase, but to give the reasoning for why you need it quickly. Hey, I'm trying to put together the guest list for Friday. Can you let me know if you're bringing whatever? And so
Right.
that indicates that I want an answer from you quickly.
Sometimes that doesn't work.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with like polite speech. Polite speech is coded speech for a reason. The whole point is plausible deniability. In other words, if I say, I need you to tell me this thing right now or I'll be upset, right? Like, even if that's a true statement, I might be worried about saying that because it's so clear. And if the other person doesn't feel like, they disagree with me on how urgent this is, or maybe something really did, like they're in the hospital and I'd be like, oh my gosh, or whatever. I want to cover my bases where I'm trying to communicate that, but also if it turns out that something's different than I think that it is, I can say like, oh, I get it. No, whatever. Or a very common version of this is if I believe, as many people do, this is especially strong in like what people call Midwest culture, which I don't think is so much geographical as it is like socioeconomic. But if I believe that if someone asks for help, you have to do the thing they asked or you're a jerk. Well, then if I ask you for help, I'm forcing you to do it unless you're a jerk. So what about if I want your help with something or I would like your help with something, but it's not super important to me and you're not a jerk if you don't want to do it and I don't want you to help me with it if you don't want to? Well, then I can't just say, hey, will you help me with this? Because now you have to do it even if you don't want to. But if I just kind of hint at you that this is something that I might like your help with, and you pick up on the hint, you can either now do the thing and help me, or you can just pretend like you didn't get the hint, right? Oh man, this is really heavy to lift. I got so much to do over here that, if you don't want to help lift it, you can just keep talking.
Right, because they didn't ask.
Obviously, one of the downsides of that is that it is possible that you just genuinely actually don't get my hint, but now I'm evaluating it as though you did and you chose not to help me. It's a terrible way to ask for help when it actually does matter to you. Like, if I'm going to be annoyed with you for saying no, then I should just ask straight up.
Right.
Because if I hint at it and you don't help me, I don't actually know if that's you saying no or if you actually didn't get it. Anyway, a lot of this polite stuff is just that, it's intended to be for, same with like rules of grammar and language and punctuation and spelling. They're helpful for communicating with people you don't know very well to have some kind of standard.
Sometimes I feel my politeness shedding away the more I'm here, but then I see it coming back and it's just a wrestling thing I'm having.
Well, like, again, it's contextual.
Yeah.
The less you know somebody, the more important it is to utilize general rules about how to communicate because you don't know them, you don't know how they'll interpret things. So the best you can do is just rely on the general. That's why the less you know someone, the more important it is to use proper grammar, even though the concept of proper grammar is just following conventions, meaning it's useful when you don't know the other person because you can both reference the same conventions even if you don't know each other. Whereas if we know each other, does it really matter if the way we're communicating follows the rules of proper grammar as long as we understand? No. So it's not that it's good to be polite or bad to be polite. It's like all things. It's the context of it.
And that's what I'm doing. I'm determining like it's a good thing to, I don't know, interrupt, be kind.
Yeah, interrupt is not a good thing to do. It's contextual.
Yeah.
It's very good in certain contexts. It's bad in other contexts. It depends on what you mean by good and bad. But
Right.
in terms of like helping you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, it's really great in some circumstances and really terrible in others.
Mhm.
That's part of why I keep talking about like rules are good to use as defaults. But if you think that there are rules that like this is something you should do at all times in all contexts, this is something you should not do in all time, that stuff doesn't exist, and you're just going to go crazy trying to figure it out. Especially for neurodivergent people, a lot of like, I swear that I know the rules, but then I don't know the rules, or like, you know, this thing went differently than the way I thought it was supposed to go, so there must be some extra rules I don't know. And no, that's just not how things work. Rules are like guidelines. They help you in the common circumstances. Like the golden rule. You know the platinum rule?
I don't remember, but I've heard of it.
So the golden rule obviously is treat others the way you want to be treated. And some people have since then put out the platinum rule, the even better rule, which is treat others as they want to be treated, which I do agree is a better thing to aim for. But again, to me, that's a misunderstanding of what a rule is. The point of the golden rule is if you don't know how this other person will want to be treated, just default to treating them the way you would want someone to treat you. Like if you don't have any other information, just that's the best thing to rely on. Is that always going to work? No. Sometimes treating somebody else the way you want to be treated is not something they're going to like.
Been there.
But the whole point of the scenario in which you're referencing that rule is that you don't know, you don't have access to the information of what they would want. If you know what they want, yes, of course, give them. But that's when people are misunderstanding rules, which are general rules of thumb. Default to this, unless you have specific information, this is the most commonly useful way to go about it. They mistake that for rules as in, this is what you are supposed to do, and as long as you do it this way, everything will work out the way you want. Because treat other people the way you want to be treated is not what you should aim for. You should aim for treating people the way that they want to be treated. But that's not the point of the rule. Isn't in this case saying like, this is what is the best thing for a person to do. It's what makes them morally good and what a person should aim at. It's saying, this is the best way to get as close to what we're really aiming at, which is treating people the way they want to be treated as possible when you don't have other better information. It's a great rule. Don't have better information, just do what you would want other people to do. It's better than you don't know what they want, don't do anything.
It's interesting that the golden rule became about this. Could have been about anything else. Just about being kind.
See,
maybe not being kind, maybe.
I generally people would say that it's about being kind. I would not though, and that's the point is, to me, that's a simplification of it. That it's actually a very practical rule of thumb. Because if I don't know what you would want me to do, then I can either just do whatever without caring about how it impacts you. That's one option. I can do nothing because I don't know what you would want, so I don't try anything. But that requires that I pretend like doing nothing isn't doing something, but it is. Or I can have some way of defaulting and just being like, this is the best way I can determine how my actions are going to impact you so that I can still do something. And if that's the case, you need some kind of rule to default to that. And default to assume, because there are universal things about being human, and there are, of course, individual things. Well, some number of the things that I would want people to do or that I would benefit from or enjoy are universal, and anybody would. Some of them are individual. And lack of any other information, just do what I want because maybe it's a universal thing or maybe it's close to it. And if it's not, I'll find out. I have a friend that I got into very long discussions about a lot of different topics with, and we kind of have to interrupt each other or you won't ever get your point in. But I think we're both pretty good at prompting the person who was interrupted about what they were talking about and getting back to them. That style of conversation works really well for me, but I have conversations with other friends where I hate being interrupted because they're prioritizing what they have to say over what I have to say and don't make any indication otherwise. So that obviously is true, right? That both of those things are true about different types of people and different types of communication. But there's also a version of interrupting where I actually very, very much care about what you have to say, and me interrupting you is the way that I express that to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're saying some stuff and I don't understand it, but I just sit and nod politely to not interrupt you and whatever, then I don't understand what you're saying. I'm whatever you're saying, it's obviously important to you to some extent that that you communicate it to me, that it's something that I hear and understand to some extent. If I'm not, but I pretend like I am, then I'm not really prioritizing understanding what you're saying. I'm just prioritizing appearing as though I understand what you're saying. But if I care more about understanding what you're saying than about whether I appear as though I am, if I care more about understanding what you're saying than I care about like avoiding the risk of upsetting you by interrupting, then what I'll do instead, when you're explaining something to me or saying something to me, is I'll interrupt and say, sorry, I didn't understand that part. What did you mean? Because I want to know what you're saying. And I don't want you or I to waste 5 minutes of our time with you saying all this stuff that you think I'm understanding and it's important to you, and I get none of it. So what, I wait until you're done and then say, I don't understand any of that, start over? Or is it better to say, hold on, can I stop you? I understood this part, and then I don't know what you mean at that last part. Yeah, nuance. Yeah, I love nuance. I don't know why those emoji signs made me think of this, like nuance, like magic. That's the gift I'm thinking of.
Oh yes, yes.
The mustache.
And then in the case of someone interrupting because they have something to say, it can appear like it's because they're not interested in what you're saying, but they might actually be. It's just their way of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like, for example, something that's happened with you and I, that happens with people all the time, right? If I say something to you, let's say I ask a question, and I'll say like, why is this important to you? And you start responding in a way that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound to me like you're answering the question I asked. I'm trying not to pick a real one, not because I'm avoiding anything, I'm just not thinking of it. I'm just making one up. But like if I say, why did you think that was important? And I genuinely mean like, what are the reasons that you were considering? What is it about this that, I want to know why it seemed important to you. I'm trying to learn that. But people obviously often interpret, why did you think that was important to me? That's not important, and how could you have thought that it was?
Yeah.
And if you think that's what I mean, then your response is going to be something like, well, it's not that I thought it was important, it's just that, or whatever.
Right.
But if I'm actually like, no, you just said it was important and I want to know why, as soon as you start to say, it's not that I thought it was important, then I might be like, wait a second, I think you didn't hear.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
So that's an instance where I might stop or interrupt you and say like, hold on, what did you just hear me say? Or a different way of doing that is to stop, interrupt somebody and restate what you said in a different way. Sorry, I genuinely want to know why you think this is important. I don't have a problem with you having done with it. I don't think it is. And that can sound like I'm just making my point again, because I kind of am in that case. But I'm doing it because I want to get information. I'm genuinely interested in what you have to say. And I think I was interpreting, it could be wrong, obviously. I was interpreting what you were about to say or what you were starting to say as being a response to something I don't care about. Like you think I'm mad at you and you're trying to calm me down and you don't need to. And so I'm just trying to cut that off and say like, no.
Yeah. We had a phone call like this.
Did we?
Well, the other day on Friday, yeah. Very similar.
Stuff happens.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, especially just generally with me, people like will frequently respond to me as though I am upset with them or think they have done a bad job or are stupid or something like that, when that's not what I'm actually thinking of doing. And people will frequently respond to me to explain why I shouldn't be disappointed in them when I'm not disappointed in them. So the more that something happens kind of consistently in a certain context, the more you start to get an eye for like, oh, that thing's happening again. Yeah, I try to be understanding and I can relate from an ADHD perspective, but I can't always rationalize, compassion away the annoyance. That feels like an accurate tone for that emoji. I usually picture jazz hands.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's this idea that there is a correct definition or a correct way to use words or correct or incorrect way to communicate is also a very new idea. Like even the concept of a dictionary is only a few hundred years old. And again, useful tool, but it has warped our sense of how all this works. So people in our culture now will frequently, when there's a miscommunication, will have a debate or an argument about who said something wrong or who interpreted something wrong. We're just arguing over one of us did it right, one of us did it wrong.
My sister has sent me screenshots of the dictionary, like, well, according to the dictionary, I'm like,
and that's one way of doing it, is
Yeah.
referring to dictionary or whatever. There's all kinds of tactics. I can just try and make you think I'm smart or make you feel stupid without making a specific point, and then you'll, or whatever. But the point of miscommunication is it doesn't matter. The way that one person interprets it is just as valid as the way that the other person interprets it. I phrased it that way thinking that you would get the point I was trying to make. You interpreted it in a way that's totally reasonable to interpret it, but it's different than what I was trying to get across. So us arguing over did I misspeak or did you misunderstand is really serves no purpose.
you saying, like, when I first started here, you said miscommunication is inevitable or something like
Yeah.
that. And, like, that has completely changed so many of my
Yeah.
conversations. Because I'm like, oh, yeah, this happens. Like, of course.
Yes.
It brings a lot of solace to me. So thanks.
Well, that's one of the things that people will argue about in the whose fault is this miscommunication. Is like, what we're doing always is we're communicating as much as we believe is necessary in order to get our point across and no more, right? Like, because communicating a bunch of stuff that I don't need to communicate is wasteful of both of our resources. It can also be very insulting, right? If I'm like, okay, I'll see you at 10 a.m. AM, by the way, that means anti-meridian, so that means before the sun is at its height. So AM means the 10 o'clock, when like, just absurd nonsense that I don't need. But we're always guessing what elements of this do I need to communicate or not. In that very same example, sometimes I'm communicating with someone and I say, hey, I'll see you at 10 a.m. And neither of us think about the fact that we're in different time zones and we're actually aiming to meet at different times and we don't see each other. And then is it my fault for not including CST? Is it your fault for not assuming CST? I am in a CST time zone or whatever, right? The fault thing is just not the point. The point is, let me get a sense of what you interpreted out of it. Okay, I get that now. I understand how you got that. Let me tell you what I interpreted out of it, what I thought of it as and expected that you would, so that you can understand how I saw it. And now we've A, clarified, repaired that miscommunication. B, become better able to communicate with one another. Am I going to remember everything from now on? Are you going to remember everything from now on? Like that way we interpret things differently? No, but we'll do it more than we would have if we hadn't discussed it. Whereas if we just argue over whose fault it is, we don't really repair the miscommunication, and we certainly don't increase our ability to communicate. We actually damage our ability to communicate in the future, because now we're both afraid of whoever messes up the miscommunication is in trouble in some way, shape, or form. You should have known. I did tell you about this thing. You knew I blah, 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 whatever. It's nonsense. I know why people do it, but it's not a helpful thing to do. Or at least it shouldn't be.
I still use your language zip file concept all the time. What's your language zip file concept?
That's interesting actually, because that's slightly different than what I'm referring. Well, I use that to talk about a different thing than what we're talking about right now. But again, immediately I can see, I'm making assumptions, but I can see how it would get translated into this. A zip file is a way of compressing data. For computers,
Yeah.
Okay. See right there, right? Like that was one of those things, by using an inquisitive tone and suggesting inquisition by the shape of my eyes. I'm communicating to you. I don't know if you know what a zip file is.
Also,
or
I'm just
not.
realizing on zip files they literally have a little zipper.
Yeah.
That's funny.
To zip and unzip.
Yeah.
So the point is that you can take data. I don't know the details, but you can take data and you can compress it into a smaller amount of data by putting it through an algorithm.
Mhm.
And as long as that algorithm then is the same algorithm you use to put it back through the other way, you can be confident that the extra data that's reconstructed will be the same as the data that was dropped out.
Mhm.
If that makes sense.
Eh,
So like if I take 5 numbers
great.
and I compress it into a file where now there's only one number.
Okay.
And I have an algorithm that
Mhm.
makes it so that every time that 5-digit sequence occurs,
Will become that
it will
one.
become that one
Mhm.
digit. Then when I unzip it, I put that one digit in, I'm referencing my code here, and I'm like, oh, that one digit represents these 5
Mhm.
digits. So as long as I use the same algorithm to put it, to unpack it, to re-expand it, as I did to condense it, I'll get the same thing every time.
Mhm.
Usually when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about language in terms of memory,
Okay.
because that's how we each individually, as thinking and conscious humans, this is how we remember things, is we, in order to perceive something, we drop out a lot of the data, and we just identify what data we.
Kind of like the golden rule where I thought kindness.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, even just in like seeing something, right? Like,
Yeah.
in seeing that ottoman, am I seeing every single detail of what's reflected to each of my rods and cones? Like, no, not consciously. My perception is just like I identify enough of that to know, to match it against my perceptual set, my concept of,
Mhm.
oh, that's the ottoman.
Mhm.
And then if I'm going to remember that, I package it away in my mind as that's that ottoman.
Mhm.
If I want to remember the color, I have to have words for that color. Oh, that's like a light blue green kind of, or whatever. Then when I remember it, I take those phrases, ottoman, light blue green, and I re-expand it, reconstruct all the additional detail. What exactly is the shade and the tone of the light blue green, or whatever. The problem with memory is, unlike a zip file program, we can't use the same algorithm because it never stays the same. So what you unpack from your memory is never exactly the same as what you put in, which is helpful to know. Still useful, doesn't mean that you're crazy or that you're wrong about everything that you remember. It's just helpful to know that like what you're really remembering is certain specific details that you've encoded, and then the rest gets just filled in
Mhm.
in ways that match your understanding.
Sure, of those
the
things.
world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's another one of those.
But in this case, when we're talking about communication, so I have a framework that I call faultless miscommunication. Oh, looks like my clock is dead. Just realizing now. Yeah, interesting. Faultless miscommunication. That we miscommunicate, but it's not a matter of whose fault is it. Because like I said, it's inevitable. I'm doing my best to say what is, I believe, going to give you the right impression. So there's 4 phases. Easy Christo did Mothra just show up? Oh, I guess the jackhammer guy. It's funny because it didn't sound louder from in here.
No, I honestly have forgotten that it's here.
Yeah, well, we're both filtering it out, obviously,
Yeah.
more effectively
So
than
funny.
Fast Insider is. I mean, this is a lot of what auditory sensitivity stuff is there's processes involved in like filtering what comes into attention and what doesn't, and what gets past those, whatever. But yes, with faultless miscommunication, I explain it to people as there's 4 steps to communication. First, I have to define communication is anything that one human does with the specific intention of impacting how another person is thinking or feeling or behaving. Not just anything I do. There's that, those are some kaiju noises. There's that phrase of all behavior is communication, which means all behavior is meaningful. If all behavior will tell you something about the person if you observe it and think about it, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But if we say all behavior is like, so me by myself with no one else around, like peeing into the toilet is communication, like it kind of, we have to be able to define what we're talking about when we're talking about communication.
Mm-hmm.
And communication is what one person does, anything a person does with the specific intent of impacting another person's thoughts, feelings, or actions.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that it's all controlling or manipulative or whatever words. Like, if I'm just saying, hey, then that's an attempt to make sure that you are aware of the fact that I'm right here.
Mm-hmm.
not like control you, but should impact your thoughts in this case to make you aware of me. If I'm saying, listen, I just want to help you. What's going on? Let me know. What can I can genuinely want to help you, but I'm communicating with you to impact the way you think so that you're thinking, oh, if I tell Brandon what I would like, he'll help me. Right? While you're communicating to the sewer gremlins or your cat. I mean, sleep is behavior. So
I always heard that all behavior communicates a need. That's the caveat I don't know.
I like that better, but I don't like that either because that's also not. You have to be really broad with what you mean by need.
Yeah,
for that to be an accurate
that's what I learned in
statement.
early childhood education. It's like
Desire would be better,
desire.
but even that, like, what desire does sleep communicate other than the desire for sleep? You know, like
What's wrong with that, Brandon?
because that's what underlies one of our terrible premises culturally, which is that everything everybody does is what they want to do,
Sure.
and anything that
Sure.
someone doesn't do, they don't want to do.
Sure.
It's not true. All behavior is meaningful. That's great because meaning is constructed. So yes, I can observe anybody's behavior and construct meaning with it, connect it to something else in some way, whether that meaning is accurate or not, who knows?
Mhm.
But I can make meaning out of anything I observe.
Yeah.
Anyway, what we're talking about, like the typical meaning of communication is anything a person does with a specific intention to impact what another person or people think, feel, or do. So it starts with that. What's my intent? What is it that I am trying to, how am I trying to impact you? What is the change I am trying to create? Just letting you know I'm here, whatever. But that is generally speaking not a conscious thing that I'm thinking of. You know, I'm not being that specific. So really there are four conscious phases. There's what am I trying to get across to you?
Mhm.
What is the point? You know, what is the meaning, the content? What am I trying to evoke in your mind with my communication? What concepts and understandings? Then second, what is my behavior? What do I do in order to try to evoke that understanding and those thoughts in your mind? Often including words that I say, but not always. Then there's observation. What do you observe? Because not everything that I am doing intentionally as part of my communication will you observe. You'll observe some. You won't even hear every word that I say.
Mhm.
And there's going to be stuff that you observe as part of my communication. You think is part of my intentional communication that it wasn't.
I didn't hear the last sentence you just said.
I said, and there's going to be part of what you observe that you think of as part of my intentional communication that it wasn't part of my intention. So I did not notice it or consider it. Right? A tone of voice that I didn't think of and was not intended to convey anything, but you think that it is. And then fourth is your interpretation of what you've observed.
Mhm.
So no way is what I'm trying to get across ever going to be exactly the same as your interpretation. But that's not the point. The point is not to be exactly the same. That's literally impossible. The point is that we want to be close enough that it doesn't cause a problem for us. If I say, hey, meet me at that spot later, and we both show up at the same time in the same place, that's good communication. Even if, you know, you thought I meant 8:01, but really I meant 8 o'clock or whatever, but we were both there at the same time. But if I say, meet me at that spot later, and we show up at different places at different times, then that's a miscommunication because what you thought I meant, your interpretation is different than my intention. Sorry, I thought there was another comment.
Okay, I'm noticing myself like just.
So it's not about is it your fault or is it my fault? Because other people, if they observed what you observed, would have also interpreted it the same way that you interpreted it. It is a reasonable way to interpret what you observed. Other people, if they were trying to communicate what I was trying to communicate, would also have done the same things that I did. Not everybody, but at least some. It's a reasonable expectation that I will get my point across if I do X, Y, or Z.
Mhm.
So I want to know what your interpretation is. And I want to clarify to you what my intent was, or if I'm the one on receiving end of miscommunication. I want to clarify to you what my interpretation was, and I want to find out what your intent was
Mhm.
so that we can understand each other. oh, I see, you meant that place at 8 o'clock. I thought you meant this other place. And then we don't have to, but we can talk about why I thought you meant this place at this time. And you can tell me why you thought I would understand that. Mostly though, when people do that, they're getting into a fight about like why you should have
Right.
known. But if we can say it as like, no, both of us, it was reasonable for us to think this way, then it's useful for me to understand why you expected I would have thought that, and it's useful for you to understand why I interpreted it as this other thing. So in that case, talking about it as the zip file would be like, I'm packing meaning into a set of behavior. You are observing a set of behavior and unpacking meaning from it.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get it so that what you unpack is close enough to what I packed in that we can move forward. So miscommunication just means when your interpretation and my intent are different in a way that causes a problem. It's always different. It's not always different in a way that causes a problem. And that's why miscommunication is inevitable. I cannot predict how everybody's going to interpret everything I say 100% accurately. And I can't even predict when that's not the case. You know what I mean? Like, I can't even know for certain that someone doesn't understand what I'm saying. There's going to be times where you think we're on the same page, I think we're on the same page, and only later do we find out, like, oh, we were not on the same page.
Yeah.
That's inevitable.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a big problem, but it still doesn't mean one person did something wrong. That's just anger, which is understandable, but not necessarily useful.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about I'm thinking about how you have taught us to like say what's on our mind, and that is a value I now have and think of as a strength. But I'm thinking about how I get frustrated when other people do not do this, and then I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about right now.
Oh, I get so frustrated sometimes.
Yeah.
For sure. Again, frustrated is a word that has a specific meaning to me.
Mm-hmm.
Frustrated is the feeling I associate with the cognitive experience of I am effortfully trying to accomplish something and my efforts are failing.
Mm-hmm.
The more that happens, the more that I'll feel this thing that I call frustration.
Mm-hmm.
It is meaningfully distinct from anger. It's its own self-control thing. And yeah, I get frustrated about this a lot because, like, imagine if you're an IT expert. You know you can't fix every problem, but you fix lots of them. You understand them. You know that you know more than most people tend to about it, whatever. And then someone says something to you about their computer not working right or something being broken. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, you're telling me about this thing. You're telling me about how it's a big problem for you, and I can probably fix it. I just need a little bit of information from you about what's going on, and then I can answer your question or tell you how to fix it. So then I'm trying to get that information from you, and you're not giving it to me. And it's like, I want to help you.
Right.
Sometimes you've explicitly asked me to help you. You want me to help you. Sometimes not, you didn't, but I just want to help anyway. And sometimes it's welcome, even though you didn't ask. Sometimes it's not, whatever. But like, if you just give me, so it's kind of like I'm saying, like, what model of computer do you have? And you're saying, like, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's like, well, it does matter. So when I'm saying to someone, like, what are you thinking right now? And they say nothing. What they're really saying is, like, it doesn't matter. There's no point to share it with you.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I know you don't think it matters. And maybe it doesn't. I can't say for sure that it does, but it might. And, like, I can't help with the information I have, or at least I can't help any more than I already have with the information I already have. But if you give me more information, I might be able to help more. So just tell me, what are you thinking? I don't even know what I'm thinking. It can get frustrating for sure.
You know what? And now I'm realizing that I'm just getting frustrated. That whole judgment thing that I've
So you're judging yourself for getting frustrated.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, a lot of times people get angry as they get frustrated. And so it is helpful to like separate those two things, because anger is a secondary emotion. To me, frustration is not. Anger is a response to a different emotion that's unpleasant. I feel sad or scared or hurt or frustrated, and then I allocate the blame, the fault for my experience of that to someone or something else. now what I feel is anger at that thing for having caused this experience.
Mhm.
So yeah, if I'm like trying to solve something, I'm trying to get you to tell me what you're thinking and you're not, I'm going to feel frustrated, which is unpleasant. As that grows, just like any other unpleasant emotional experience, there's a likelihood or a tendency for me to start to be like, you know what, screw you. I'm so mad at you for not just telling me what you think or whatever.
Yeah.
And then we conflate the two things. We think frustration and anger is the same.
Yeah. And I I've used this word before, but I feel this like righteousness of like, you don't understand what benefits happen from this thing. Like, why aren't you doing it? And I don't know.
Well, and so when you look at communication this way,
Mm-hmm.
the nice thing / also sometimes annoying thing is that you have a role in every single miscommunication.
Yeah.
The actual value in blaming people for miscommunication is the same as all blame when it comes to interpersonal relationships. None of it's real. That's not to say that like all people are doing equally good or bad things or anything like that. It's just to say that like the concept that one person doing one thing is the sole thing that plays into anything it can't be true, right? Like I don't know, I can't break your favorite vase if your vase isn't right here in front of me to be able to knock it over. Like that, for practical purposes, we can still say that's my fault. But if I really want to debate it, I can be like, well, you put it in a spot where, it could have been knocked over. If you had kept it somewhere else, I couldn't have done whatever. So there's that joke about like, well, really, if George Washington hadn't founded this country in the first place, so this is all his fault, whatever. But the benefit in assigning fault or blame is to say, we both agree that something happened here that's not good, and we should work on making sure it doesn't happen again. If we can agree on whose fault it is, then what we're saying is that's the person who now has to put effort into trying to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
And the person whose fault it isn't does not have to think about or work on or change anything.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see it as flawless miscommunication, which is really beneficial and more accurate, you can't do that anymore. So I can't just be like, you're not understanding why this is important, without thinking I am not communicating to you the way in which I believe this is important in a way that you can understand. The way you're interpreting what I'm saying is reasonable. And so I got to try and communicate in a different way. And the result of that is being someone who is really, really skillful at communicating, because I'm always working on how do I get this across? How do I get this across? And instead of being like, nah, you don't get it. You're just being obtuse or whatever and giving up. But it's the same as improving any other skill. Like it's effortful. You're putting work into it. And it is annoying sometimes, because sometimes it would be nice to just be like, you know what? You're wrong about that. Like I'm being clear. You're wrong. Because then I could just be done.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about how it's easier with some people, and then other people I'm like introducing a concept of communicating about communicating, and it's so challenging.
Learning where to start with somebody is a big part of it. Like, how much do I need to back up? Or is this a thing where by telling a story first to get the concept across and then explaining it? Or is this something where I ask questions of this person first or whatever?
It's definitely my fault if my cat knocks over my favorite vase. I should have known better. It is their right to break anything they can reach.
Well, and that is very funny, and also indicative of what we're talking about when it comes to fault. We're talking about who's in the right.
Mm-hmm.
We could say the same thing, like, okay, my 3-year-old knocked over a vase and broke it. Well, why'd you leave that in the reach of a 3-year-old? Well, my 8-year-old knocked over a vase and broke it. Is it his fault now, or is it still, I shouldn't have left it where he could reach it? 10, 12, like, where do we cut it off, right? Again, I appreciate you acknowledging my funny.
Always.
My wife will jokingly, at least I believe that it is a joke, will jokingly accuse me of never laughing at her.
Uh-huh.
She'll say that whenever she says something funny, I just go, oh, that's funny. Which is not true, but it is something that somebody complains about their boyfriend in a show that we watched one time as having done that. And like, I obviously laugh at her all the time, but sometimes she commits to the bit so hard that I'm not sure if she might really believe it in that moment, even though the other moment she doesn't. That's honestly the danger in humor for people.
Danger in humor, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a big danger that like humor is context dependent. It's all about tone and all this kind of stuff. And like we were just talking about how memory works, you don't encode all of that in your memories. And so if you make the same jokes over and over and over and over, eventually that's true for you. You know you're still joking about it, but you're also thinking that it's true. If you're joking about like, oh, I'm such an idiot, and you joke about that all the time, sooner or later you genuinely think you're an idiot, even though you're also joking about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So when people do bits, which my wife and I we love doing bits. That's sometimes we'll get into characters, like doing a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I go for like 20 minutes.
It's relatable.
That's funny. The failure made of humor is asshole. That's interesting. It can be hard. A lot of people, that's in quotes. That's why I said that was interesting, because it seems like that's a quote and it's an interesting quote. It can be hard. A lot of people believe there is truth in every just kidding. Yeah, that's another one of those phrases that like there's a little bit of truth in every joke. That like
I say that all the time. There's truth behind every JK.
So I don't know. This is one of those moments, I guess, for whatever reason, I'm feeling self-conscious about approaching this stuff the way that I do.
Uh-huh.
And having like, no, I've dissected this, whatever, but I have. And this is what I think about that. Patrick Rothfuss, that's interesting. Patrick Rothfuss is the person who said that quote, "The failure made of humor is
I don't know
asshole."
what Patrick Rothfuss is.
He's a fantasy author.
Oh, right.
There's truth behind every joke.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of in the same vein of like all behavior is communication.
Mm-hmm.
The literal statement that every joke has a little bit of truth to it is not accurate, right? Like, obviously, in many, many cases, the entire point of a joke, like the whole thing that makes it humorous, is that the thing I am saying is so opposed to what I actually think.
Right.
Like the entire field of sarcasm, again, the whole point is I don't actually think the thing that I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But if we mean it in the sense of like humor is communication and somebody's making a joke for a reason, and not just that they're making a joke for a reason, but there are reasons that they're making that specific joke, then that's an accurate statement. Whether or not we, again, this is all meaning, it's constructed, it's made up. Whether we can accurately suss out what is the reason that that person made that joke at that point in that way about that thing, whatever, is completely separate. But the theory that like there's reasons behind everything everybody does is solid. Mostly that phrase I think is common just because sometimes people do actually try to like cage criticisms in humor for various reasons. Sometimes it's like mean and bullying. Sometimes I'm trying to make fun of you in a way that like, I'm trying to think of an example. You know, like sometimes it's true that if I'm saying like, oh my gosh, you smell like a garbage dump, and then someone's like, oh, I'm just joking, but there's truth underneath that of like, I do actually think that you smell, right?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I'm trying to be nice to you by caging something in a joke.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, here, there's this thing that I do want to communicate to you that I think you won't like, but maybe if I put it into this joke, I can get it across. And then that way, if you get mad at me, I can say, hey, I'm just joking, whatever. Right? If I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so sensitive about everything. It's like talking to I don't know, whatever. Something really sensitive. And you're like, you really think that? And I'd be like, oh, it's just a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could be like, well, jokes have truth in them, because in that case, you think that joke is something that I was trying to communicate. And sometimes when you think that, you're right. And sometimes when you think it, you're wrong. But like the idea that all jokes have literal truth to them,
right.
Obviously not.
It is funny though, as someone who's dating a comedian and watching like comedy shows, just I'm always like, I don't know, thinking about like the truths and where the insecurities are. Like I'm watching a lot, just not laughing and just being like, huh, interesting.
Well, if you
Which is annoying. I just want to laugh sometimes, but I just am thinking so much.
certain types of storytellers are very aware that they're storytellers.
Yeah.
And sometimes storytellers that understand that what they are as a storyteller
Yeah.
will like really start to explore and philosophize about what it is to tell stories and what it means to be a storyteller. I feel like I fall into that category, certainly. And when you start going down that path, it pretty quickly you come to the conclusion, because it's inevitable, that like everything humans communicate is a story.
Yeah.
Like how accurate they are is separate from, is it a story? Is it a narrative?
Yeah.
And there's no such thing, except in very limited circumstances, as what a person is communicating is unequivocally the truth of like reality, because humans are not capable of knowing that in great detail. You know, another way of framing what we were saying earlier about perceiving the Ottoman is what the concept I have in my mind. I'm telling myself a story about what this thing is, right? And so in that way, like a lot of comedy is sometimes knowingly, but sometimes unknowingly, just like playing with storytelling conventions.
But then when I've noticed the structure that someone plays with, I'm like so heightened aware of their structure of, oh, then they're going to do this type of thing and this type of thing, when you know a comedian and their little things.
Well, generally comedy,
Yeah, let's read these.
Now that I'm thinking about it, my debate friend almost never laughs, but sometimes he sounds amused in his tone when he responds. And if I really push a bit, I can get an exasperated / amused exhale. I can get him to be mused. There's like a meme that I don't know if it's still around, but was in use for a while. Well, that made me exhale from my nostrils slightly more forcefully than I usually do. You know,
people say I'm a bad audience member because I don't laugh.
Generally, or just for comedy?
For comedy, yeah.
Yeah, being somebody who doesn't laugh out loud is a terrible audience member for like a comedy club.
Yeah. Oh, awful.
Because it's one of those things that really, it really relies on the vibe and the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like the 2-drink minimum is not just so that the venue makes money. It is also like,
2 drinks feels like so much to me.
Suspension of disbelief or whatever. Like
yeah.
In any performance art, there is a contract between the performer and the audience of like what we're doing here. That's part of why hecklers are so frustrating, not just to the comedians, but like to other audience members. It's like, what are you doing, man? We all know what we're doing here. Like we all know that the comedian is saying some stuff that doesn't really make sense.
Right.
This is not a debate about like, are what you're saying exactly? Like it's a comedy show. We have signed on for that. That the point of this was that they're going to say some stuff. We'll laugh at it. Does that mean they don't have to be funny? No, but like it also means we gotta lean into allowing them to be funny, you know, like not resist it or whatever. So yeah, having people that laugh out loud is beneficial to creating that vibe, to liberating other people to laugh out loud, to giving social cues to everyone to laugh. Anyway, yeah, the point, people who mistake comedy as some kind of a battle, which many comedians do, and they set themselves up for that. Sometimes, again, purposefully, they want people to try and heckle them because that's part of their performances, destroying hecklers or whatever. But in our culture, at least, well, okay, here's my theories about comedy, humor, laughter generally, is the way that cognition and consciousness works is we're all about pattern recognition because we need to do that data compression, right? Like, do I really think about all the detailed ways in which this ottoman is different from a different ottoman? Like, no, not really. They're, for my purposes, basically the same. The only relevant differences are like the size and the color or whatever, you know. So that means that everything we do, including the way we perceive the world around us, is based on trying to identify and then identify what we see as a pattern and then predict where that pattern might go. And anytime that one of our predictions of where a pattern might go is wrong, it's distressing because we've been basing some thoughts, feelings, decisions, whatever, on our prediction. Our prediction's wrong. Oh crap, I don't know what things I've been doing that are now like not the best to have been doing.
Mhm.
But sometimes our prediction turns out to be wrong in a way that is not problematic. And that I think is a lot of what humor and laughter and comedy is. Even tickling, right? It's like in the moment to moment way, my body is evaluating like I'm being attacked,
Mhm.
and then nope, it's different than that. It's not something that's painful, and so it's this like sense
Yeah.
of relief. And it's not the laughter that I don't like; it's the fact that my body continuously is getting into I'm being attacked, and it's the relief of that not being attacked that results in the laughter. So humor is about setting people up to expect something and then delivering something different than what they expected, but in a way that does not cause them a problem.
Mhm.
Part of the reason it works better at like a comedy club is because we've all agreed that that's what's happening here. So you are primed to understand that I'm going to do things you don't expect, and whenever I do, it's not a problem.
Right.
It's just to be funny. That's why I'm doing it. I avoid comedy shows that don't have some idea that I don't have some idea of the content because I'm picky about humor, but I feel bad if someone's on stage trying their best and I'm not laughing. Kind of leans into what Bass Insider and you were both saying earlier about, the feeling a sense of urgency or whatever to respond. You're very concerned about how you're going to impact other people and whether what you do is going to be something that they would like. So if I go, I'll probably have to laugh even if I don't like it. Especially if no one else is laughing. See, but again, part of the contract of a comedy performance at a club, right, is we're all paying money because you're providing a service that is a skill-oriented thing. Your job is to make us laugh. It's not our job to laugh. Even
that's where I'm at now. I'm just like, make me laugh.
So I would not go to a comedy club if I don't enjoy that experience. Not because I'm worried that if I don't laugh, I'm a jerk.
Yeah.
It's kind of like saying I don't like to go see movies because sometimes I don't like those movies. And obviously, I know there's a difference because the performers are not there right in front of you, but or plays. I don't go see plays because sometimes I think someone did a bad job in a performance. Like, oh well, that's the whole point. They're signing up for as an actor. Part of what I'm signing up for is knowing that people are going to be perceiving my performance and having thoughts about it.
Doing comedy sounds so much scarier though, Brandon. That sounds like I don't think I will ever try to perform stand-up comedy.
I think that's probably only because you don't like the idea of writing your own material.
No, I don't mind that. It's just I cannot in my mind decipher will people think this is funny? Like I don't.
Yeah, which wouldn't matter unless you have to write your own material.
Right.
It's funny.
I suppose so.
Where if you do a play and people don't like it, you can still think like I did a good job or
totally
performed well. It's just not a good play.
Yes, it's a type of vulnerability stand-up comedy that I don't feel like exploring.
That is fair.
Yeah.
I would expect that most people don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't pursue it. I don't think I would find it to be very uncomfortable per se, but I certainly don't pursue it. Go out to do it.
I'd be more likely to
I'd be more likely to go with the big crowd because my particular reaction matters less. Sure. And again, I'm not saying that I don't understand your impulse here of like, oh, that poor guy up on stage. I don't want to make him feel bad. I don't want to make her feel bad, whatever. But also like there's something to be said for if someone's trying to be a professional comedian and what they're doing doesn't make people laugh, it's not really nice of us to convince them that it will make people laugh.
See, that type of response I gave for like high school theater students auditioning. I would be like that cheerleader of like really smiling and being encouraging. But now that you're saying that, I'm like,
well, that's different. High school.
Yeah, it's different because it's not like the career.
It's not necessarily if somebody's like, I'm going to do this for my career.
Sure.
If someone's trying to make a living off of it, then yeah, like, I don't want to be like, oh, that material is hilarious. And then they go and try it and nobody thinks it's funny.
Yeah.
That's like listening to your friend's music and being like, this is amazing when you really don't think it's any good. And then they go out and try it and it bombs. And just because you don't think it's good doesn't mean nobody else will, but that's even more reason to just give your real feedback. Like,
right.
Oh, this is what I actually think. But also like lots of popular music that I don't like. Or whatever. Anyway, we're going to wrap up because my mouth is like bone dry.
Yeah.
Get some water.
That's fine.
Is that all right?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we're going to wrap up. I don't even know what time it is because my clock.
It is 2:30. Just
2:30.
about.
Okay, perfect. It's good to be with you all. Thank you, Baston Cider and G31 for your comments and the chat. We will be back next week, same time, same day, Monday, 1 to 2 p.m., maybe some extra CST. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.